Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for today's special Eden webinar. I'm going to give it just one more minute before we start, since it looks like our waiting room is very full and we're adding people quite quickly. So just going to give it one more minute to add those people that are in the waiting room. All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to begin with today's webinar. We'd like to thank you all for joining us on this special webinar around the COVID-19 crisis that we're all facing. Today's webinar is entitled Managing Work-Life Balance When Working from Home with No Childcare. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Extension Disaster Education Network and its Professional Development Committee. My name is Rick Griffiths. I'm the chair of the Professional Development Committee and a Family and Consumer Science agent for New Mexico State University's Cooperative Extension. I would like to ask that everyone take a minute to add your name to the chat box, as well as the name of your institution, so that we have a record of who attended today. At the end, we'll also be asking you to complete an evaluation so that we know if how effective this webinar was at helping you navigate through these unprecedented times. Just a little housekeeping as we do begin. If you have any questions during the presentation, we're going to ask that you please put them into the chat box. We do have our two very capable Eden administrators with us, Abby and Cheyenne. They'll be monitoring the chat box as we go through and feeding me questions to ask at the end. Because we do have such a high number of participants on this webinar, we're up to 170 at this point in time, and we're still adding participants into the webinar. We may not be able to get to all of the questions, so they will go through, and if there are similar questions, they will group them together so that we can ask them one time. So just be aware of that. If you do see someone has already asked the question, be aware that we're going to try and get to as many as we can, but we do have quite a large number of people on this group. At the end of the webinar, we will be sending out an evaluation survey, so we do ask that you complete that. Without further ado, we're going to move to our presentation. Our presenter today, Kristine is an assistant professor with the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Purdue University. She grew up in Southeastern Wisconsin and earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with majors in psychology and sociology. She went on to earn her Ph.D. in Developmental Psychology from Penn State and completed her postdoc training at Brown University before coming to Purdue. Her research tackles questions about the development of behavior problems and substance use across the lifespan, incorporating the integrated roles of genetics, parental risk, neuroendocrine development, and family environments across childhood and adolescence. She focuses especially on the role of parent-child communications and relationships quality of middle childhood and adolescence. She's also the mother of two little ones, has a spouse who is also an assistant professor at Purdue. So we're going to turn it over to Kristine, and we look forward to the great advice and information that she's going to provide us within this webinar, Managing Work-Life Balance When Working from Home with No Childcare. So thank you, Kristine.
Thanks, Rick, and thanks everybody to tuning in. I hope that you can find something that's at least useful to you in this talk. So Just trying to figure out, there we go. Okay. So the title of the talk today is How to Manage Work-Life Balance When Working from Home with No Childcare. And I'm going to be trying to give you some tips and some ideas, but also grounded in some theory. So managing work-life balance in the same small space requires acceptance, perspective taking, and flexibility to change, as well as time that you don't have and standards you don't want. I'm thinking about my own extra use of screen time with my kids. The information that I'm going to provide is guided by family resilience and family systems theory research. And it's also guided by research on child development and by my own experiences in interviews with others. So my goal here today is to give you some practical advice that's grounded in science, but is still doable. So the bulk of the scientific expertise I'm drawing on with regard to family resilience is from Froma Walsh. She, along with these two, Cora is 1.5 and Jacob is 4, are the primary sources for the talk today, along with stories from a couple of handful of families that I've interviewed about their situations, challenges, and successes over the course of the past couple of weeks. The way that I've been managing my own work-life balance altogether is through a combination of messes, so those are just dried beans that get everywhere, activities, and shift work with a very supportive husband who also works from home and is also a professor in a totally different field, but with a very similar day-to-day job profile. We're lucky because we can share the role and have fairly flexible jobs that allow for less total hours of work per day right now. And we also have an office set up in our guest room that has a locking door to provide some uninterrupted time. This is really an ideal situation that we're really extremely grateful for and that you're not really going to hear much else about after this slide. So I mentioned resilience. What is resilience? Let's start with the second definition provided by Merriam-Webster online. For families, I'm talking about the ability to recover from or adjust relatively easily to misfortune or change. The idea of family resilience is grounded in the perspective of the family unit being a system. I like to think of it as a web. If you pull on one string, the rest of the strings and connections will feel a tug. Resilience is the ability for the family to recover its normal web shape, however that looks for whatever family, after some tugs. The nice thing about the family web is that if you strengthen one string, the whole web is stronger. But it's also important to understand that in times of strain, like when you're forced to work from home with no childcare, the whole web feels it. That means as stressed as you are, your spouse, if you have one, other caregivers, if you have them, and especially your kids feel it too. Now, they see your work stress and they feel that too. It's good to remember that the family is a system, and sometimes it might be helpful to take the perspective of the other people in your family as well as your own. So the part of Froma Walsh's work that I'm focusing on for this particular question of how to manage working from home with kids and no childcare is the idea of flexibility to change. Dr. Walsh laid out 4 principles for what flexibility to change means in the context of families coming together in times of strain. The first is rebound, or adaptive change to meet challenges. The main idea here is that if you can, try to bounce forward, not back. Embrace that new situations call for new things, and together as a family, you can respond in a way that helps the family grow. The second is reorganize, restabilize, be dependable and predictable. The idea behind this principle is that life will look different, and the easiest way to get through it is to communicate and make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of the expectations, new routines or new schedules, and coming up with new rituals that work now can help to establish the new normal. The third is authoritative leadership. Here, I want to stress that families are set up in different ways. Sometimes there's a very strong head of the household, and sometimes it's more egalitarian, with kids having relatively more input into decision-making. Authoritative leadership means that it's okay for parents to have expectations of their kids for chores or for other things, and to be able to request some time for themselves if kids are older. Family leadership looks different in each family, but in any family, now is a great time to focus on nurturing, guiding, and protecting the flock. Finally, cooperative parenting and caregiving teams are a huge support. Teams really help, and it can look very different, and it can even be remote these days. So for example, my parents help entertain the kids over FaceTime in a pinch at least a few days a week when I just need to send off an email. The key in dealing with shifts in cooperative parenting and in caregiving teams is to be kind and respectful with yourself and others in the inevitable negotiations of new responsibilities. So I'm going to show you some examples of how we can take these principles and apply them and tailor coping strategies to specific families as we progress through today. But first, I need to highlight that there is a very wide diversity in experiences in families. One size does not fit all. I encourage you to take a look at this table, which I'm sure doesn't come close to capturing everyone's experiences. Where do you fit? Do you have others in your community that fit elsewhere? Just understanding the different types of challenges that families face can help us to be kind and understanding and supportive of others. A key here is acceptance and kindness, both of which will put you in a better headspace to deal with your own challenges compared to feeling sorry for yourself or falling into the trap of thinking that you have it worse than anyone else. In doing research for this webinar, I looked at the tips floating around the internet, and I just wanted to bring some here along with my personal reactions to them. So the first tip I saw come up a lot is enjoy the extra time you have as a family. My initial reaction to this is, what extra time? But there's some good things that we can take from these. The second is communicate your needs with your partner, assuming you have one. Another one is let it go, in which case I only hear Elsa going through my head because that's what the kids sing all the time. Another is be present in what you're doing at the moment. I find this one very challenging because there's so many things that we have to balance in our heads. Another one is use a schedule. Schedules can work really well, but they can also fall apart very quickly. So this may or may not be a good tip for you. Have activities ready. This is an eye roll. At first, I was like, how am I supposed to know what activities to do? When am I supposed to put them together? And how am I supposed to set them up and entertain the kids and clean them up? And it just seems like a ton of work additional to everything else that I have to do. I've come around on this one though, because it really does engage my kids in a way that nothing else does. And the last common tip is to swap shifts with your partner so that you can focus on your work uninterrupted. These are actually all really great tips, but we know that there's diversity in families. How do you feel when you get a tip that you can't use? I personally get a little bit annoyed probably when I get a tip that I can't use. And sometimes I feel a little bit of shame, like maybe I'm not so good of a parent because I can't be doing the things that are the best things for my family to do. What I want to say about common tips is that your mindset is really important. Having a positive and realistic mindset is going to help you a lot. And understanding that these tips are just ideas and you can take and leave things that work for your family or don't is really important to keep in mind. You need to be kind to yourself. Really be kind to yourself. The biggest thing here is to not live up or not expect to live up to social media. Take the schedule, for example. This might make you super happy. For some, schedules are necessary as a stress relief tool. This also might make you super anxious. For others, schedules like this cause added stress. I personally love schedules, and I can make a computer schedule for my husband and I to organize our work, but I've never been able to manage something like this for my kids. So I let that go and I don't even try. We do have anchor points, so meals and naps that typically occur around the same time each day, but no schedule for specific types of activities like 10 a.m. art time. I've just come to accept that that's what works for my family, and accepting that really helps us to move forward instead of trying to fit something that doesn't work for us. The other biggest be kind to yourself tip is to remember to have realistic expectations. View tips and articles in this whole presentation as a curated list of ideas. You cannot possibly use every tip out there or everything that I say here today. Take what resonates with you, ignore the things that don't make sense to you or your life. So let's go back to the last common tip on shift work. Considering the diversity in family experiences, who would shift work for? I would argue that it only works for families where there are mostly even caregiving responsibilities and flexible work patterns. Still, even if you do have the luxury of trying the solution, it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. Some solutions will work better for some families, but even if a solution works for you, you can expect that it's not going to go perfectly smoothly. For single or effectively single parents, and what I mean by effectively single parents are somebody where, for example, the spouse works outside of the home or has to self-quarantine because of the nature of their job or who is currently ill. For single or effectively single parents, shift work is just not possible. And hearing that you should try it might be super annoying or make you feel really badly. Similarly, the same thing goes for parents who are both very busy. If you're on calls literally all day, you can't switch off with each other either. Despite the diversity in family experiences, there are some common challenges to the majority of us. First, we're all forced to learn new things. Also, when are we supposed to learn these new things? Most of us have new or shifting work responsibilities. We have to learn to do everything online. We might have to be teaching online, or we might have to be seeing patients online. We are all having to learn how to homeschool our kids, whatever age they are. And we might be helping our laid off employees figure out what to do now and figure out how to handle their emotions around their fears. Clearly, none of us have enough hours in the day for multiple full-time jobs and all of the housework that's always there, and even more since everybody's home and we're having more meals and messes at home. These common challenges require us to rebound and adapt to changing roles and responsibilities. That's one of our guiding principles. Here, I think a positive mindset can really help. Some people find it helpful to simply be reminded that the situation is relatively short-term and you can do anything for a short while. But also, you're gaining new skills that can serve you moving forward. Personally, I used to be very terrified whenever I had to have both kids all by myself for an extended period of time. I wasn't sure how I was going to possibly survive it. Now that that's happening all of the time, I know how to manage both kids much more easily than I used to. I've had a lot more practice. And so that's a new skill that I've learned that I'll be able to carry forwards. Some people find it helpful to retain a little bit of focus on the silver linings wherever you can. Recently, the Association for Psychological Science interviewed a resilience expert about what individuals can do to help get through this tough time. The most important message was that it might not be easy. In fact, it will not be easy, but we at our core are a resilient species and you can do it. You can cope with this. Humans are meant to be resilient. So how can you cope? My advice is actually to create your own strategies. Remember that you and your family are unique, and so someone else's solutions are unlikely to fit you like a glove. Trying to fit into someone else's answers will create more work and use more time than you actually need to spend. As you create your own strategies, it's a good idea to keep what you can from your normal family functions and routines. You are not reinventing yourself right now, and stability and routine is very comforting for kids and for adults too. Don't try and revamp your whole family life. Instead, focus on baby steps. Baby steps mean that change is slow. You might be feeling that there are a ton of expectations and you need to do all of the things right now. But manage your expectations. Let change happen in a slow and sustainable way. Your mindset is going to make or break your ability to cope. Wherever you can, just reset. Whenever you feel overwhelmed, take 3 deep breaths. That's a super quick form of self-care, it counts, and mindfulness that we know works. When you feel like there's no end in sight, take a break, call a friend, take a walk. If you're someone who resonates with dark humor, use it. Do whatever you need to in very short 30 seconds, 1 minute times to get your mind right. It's just probably not a good idea to turn to social media, since we know that the social comparisons tend to make negative feelings worse. My students never believed me, but even when you feel totally swamped at work, you can take a break, and you should. The work will always be there when you come back. So here's where I want to ground us in child development for a moment. On this slide, I've put some of the main goals of 4 broad developmental periods. I think it's really important to remember what your kids are supposed to be doing and needing right now. I personally, even knowing this stuff very well, find myself getting frustrated when my little ones need me literally all the time and can't self-entertain for even a moment. But little ones are developing basic milestones like walking and talking. They are very self-focused, they're supposed to be, and they're just discovering emotions and learning how to label them. They tend to have very big emotions and don't know what to do with them. Turns out simply labeling and explaining to them what they're feeling can be really helpful and help them manage their emotions as well. As they grow, kids go through a lot of cognitive development. They start to shift from being totally self-focused to being more relationship-oriented. They experience more complex emotions, and they still need help in understanding what they're feeling. As kids enter their teens, they shift from a family focus to being very peer-oriented. These days, taking away their ability to see peers is a very big deal, and you might find that you have to take a more prominent role in figuring out ways that they can still be connecting with their peers. They have complex cognition and this really odd juxtaposition of being more likely to take risks, but also more future-oriented. And this can make rational decision-making very hit or miss, which can be very frustrating to parents. In emerging adulthood, which is most often college, there's a fuller transition to independence and a lot of soul searching that goes along with that. It can lead to closer or less close family ties. And if your college kids are suddenly stuck at home with you, it might be challenging to provide the space they need to grow more independent and make their own choices. And there may be more conflict than the family's accustomed to. Little ones need structure, routine, and basic care like feeding and dressing, and lots of attention and interaction, although those needs decrease with age. So one thing that you can count on is that kids will do what gives them the best attention. So if you've got somewhat divided attention and the only way that you ever respond to them is when they're doing something very bad, guess what they're going to do? They're going to act out more. If you give them attention when they do good things, then that will help with their behavior. Other things like the learning environment remain important for a longer period of time, but what it looks like shifts. So with little ones, this is going to be very play-based learning, but with kids and teens, this might be help with homework. And while you might not need to communicate a lot beyond labeling things and experiences with very little ones, communications and content style with age as well, becoming more complex and then more mutual over time. There's also an increasing need for social connection with peers and friends that starts in childhood and increases with age. So it's just important to remember that what your kids need is going to be different depending on the age of your kid, and that a lot of things that might be very annoying and challenging are actually very normal and things that they ought to be doing at this time. So considering the developmental stages for younger kids, some common challenges that pop up when working from home with no childcare centers on demand for attention. Young kids can't, or even more annoyingly won't, self-entertain. And when sometimes cute, a lot of those developmentally appropriate behaviors like big negative emotions and tantrums can be very irritating. So here is a place to Practice authoritative leadership, specifically related to nurturing and guiding. Forgive your kids for acting in an age-appropriate way, and embrace your role as a caregiver and guide, and nurture your child. The time will march onwards and eventually pass, so you have an opportunity here that you don't usually have. By itself, this seems like a very tall order, at least to me. So take a baby step. For example, what if you start with 1 hour per day of very focused care and effort? I've discovered with my own kids that some truly undivided attention, and then something novel like giving them a stack of Tupperware, can buy me some uninterrupted time. After I've really plugged in with them, they're satisfied, and then they can self-entertain for a little while. I mean, like 10 minutes. I've also discovered that little ones are all about helping if it's framed as a joint activity or game. I keep forgetting that if I ask my 1.5-year-old to go throw something in the trash, she actually will usually do it. Giving them chores that help but are moderately fun is a good way to involve them and lighten your load. So when they spill water all over the house, instead of getting mad at them, get out the towels and let them roll across the floor in the towels. They'll clean up most of the mess for you, and they'll have fun doing something new. My cousin always tells me to let it be fun, which is something that I've really struggled with understanding what that means. But examples like this, letting them roll around in towels on the floor, is a good example of that. It's a way that we can let them have fun and kind of let go of that really intense, oh no, I have another mess reaction that helps the whole family get along better. It's also important to remember to treat kids with care and understanding, because they're probably scared or confused on some level. Even the little ones are picking up that there's some terrible virus that's going around and making people sick, but they don't understand what it is. It's your job to help regulate emotions for them and to help explain things for them in a way that they can understand. And I know sometimes I just need a little reminder of that from time to time. So now I'm going to show you a few examples from families who have been making it work. For the first example, I talked with a parent with 3 kids under the age of 5. In this family, both parents work full-time. They lived in an apartment in Brooklyn, so very early in March, they drove to her parents' place to have more physical space and outdoor space to weather the virus. They had challenges and solutions relating to reorganizing, restabilizing, and cooperative parenting and parenting. In this particular family, the mother is far more structured than the father. This has been a cause of strife in the family in the past, where he wants to be more spontaneous and she wants to be more planful. Because of this situation, they have found a new balance. In order to reorganize and restabilize and to provide something predictable the whole family could rely on, she created a schedule in order to communicate the needs of the kids to everyone so that they would have the structure that they need to thrive, even when she couldn't oversee it. But built into that schedule is enough free time that he can choose to do something unstructured and spontaneous with them within the bounds of social responsibility. A particular challenge in this family is related to caregiving teams. They are now in a multi-generation home where they previously were not. It's easy for the parents to expect more of a co-parenting role from the grandparents than they can provide emotionally or physically. And then it's also easy for the parents to feel some resentment when that extra caregiving support is not given. And it's confusing to the kids about who they should be going to for what. After a tough week, the parents and grandparents finally had a talk together and expressed their needs and were able to come up with a good arrangement where the grandparents provided a few hours of relief every day, but were not expected to carry the lion's share of the caregiving responsibilities. Having the different roles and responsibilities more clearly delineated helps them a lot. It's easy to see how this type of upheaval could operate in the reverse, in a multi-generational home where other caregivers have a larger role with more freedom usually and suddenly feel confined when parents are around and available and step in and have opinions, would also be challenging. In both of these instances, the key is communication. The same basic tips for communicating well among family members applies here. First, try to avoid blaming the other individual. A good tip is to use I statements, which you can Google for good examples on YouTube. which basically puts the focus on your own feelings instead of on the other's actions. Second, take a breath or a time out, even if it's just stepping into the bathroom and leaning against the door for a minute, where you seriously try to breathe and clear your head and get your emotions under control. Third is listen, just truly listen. Again, listening is very challenging, but there are a lot of resources available online for learning tips on how to be a better listener. I also talked with a single mother of a 5-year-old. She has been trying to be productive while working in a flexible job from home, but her child needs constant attention. In order to thrive, she has embraced the principle of authoritative leadership. In this family, the mother quickly came to realize that her role as a parent superseded her role as a scientist, whether she liked it or not. She learned to accept that her productivity was going to go down, but she also actually enjoyed the time spent together with her child. She truly enjoyed it. She chose to have a positive and nurturing attitude. She set clear guidelines and rules for her child, and she's found ways for her child to contribute to the family. And she mentions that truthfully knowing that there's a light at the end of the tunnel and that childcare will eventually be restored helps a lot. She also found that reorganizing their schedule helped. She made a new daily schedule, totally new one, for the both of them, which basically followed what her daughter did in daycare, not what they had been doing at home before, moving between different activities like toys, art, reading, iPad, etc. Some of the activities buy her some work time, and others involve teaching and attention to meet her child's needs. Most of her work is actually done after her child's bedtime. She had relatively high expectations of productivity at the beginning, but kept failing, and the mismatch was making her very anxious. So she talked to her colleagues and her family, and with their help, she adjusted her daily time, and she lowered her expectations and made sure that the people who she was working with also understood realistic expectations in her case. And the situation is much better now. She also shared a great example of rebounding and showing adaptive change to meet challenges. One unexpected thing that she found was involving the cat in every aspect of their lives helped a lot because it engaged her child with chores and activities that were otherwise met with resistance. So that's a nice lesson in using what you've got to build something unique for your family. Next, I talked to a parent where only one parent was working from home with school-age kids. This family faced some challenges in the spousal relationship, specifically about navigating negative emotions and coping with fear. So remember that the family is a system, and although today I'm mostly talking about parents working from home and also managing childcare and learning, this is only one of the strings of the web of family life. A challenge in this family is that the spouse that works from home began to feel a little bit of resentment towards the spouse who, quote, got to escape every day. It was easy for the at-home spouse to forget that the spouse that works outside of the home had additional stressors related to being on the front lines and risking exposure to the virus and fears of bringing it home. The spouse at work was also a bit sad at missing out on the quality time that the spouse at home was getting in the at-work spouse's mind. This was really a typical grass is greener situation. Here they needed to restabilize their spousal relationship. And a key strategy to manage those feelings of resentment and fear of exposure to the virus and overwhelmed attitudes was simply to have open and honest conversations where each spouse is committed to listening and perspective taking. I say simply, but it's not simple. These are very challenging conversations to have, and no one, at least nobody that I know, is good at them. But opening conversation with how are you feeling or how is blank affecting you are typically good places to start. And when the conversations go poorly, because they will sometimes, the best thing to do is to take a breath, find some space, emotionally, physically if you can, and not give up. Try it again later when you guys are both in an okay position to do so and you're both actually committed to having a conversation calmly. With regard to cooperative parenting, the family has found that the division of labor in the home, especially around childcare, has had to shift quite a bit. Obviously, The parent who's working from home has most of the childcare responsibilities for most of the day. Although I'm not ideal for the spouse who's working out of the home, who typically likes and is used to a little decompression time after work, that out of the home working spouse takes on childcare the moment they walk in the door to allow time for the spouse at home to get some uninterrupted work time. If you find yourself in a similar situation, it might help to remember that these are growing pains that will expand your parenting repertoire, and to keep in the forefront of your minds that you are a team in this together. The attitude of giving and working together can ease a lot of strife. I also talked with a family where both parents are working from home, but their jobs are very inflexible. They had to rebound and adapt to meet new challenges. Families in this situation may benefit from discussing the situation with their bosses to try and reduce the number of meetings and expectations around work. Families in this position also tend to increase the screen usage of the kids, which is totally okay and acceptable, even though it goes against everything that you've been hearing for as long as you can remember. This is actually an adaptive change in the current circumstance that can be weaned back down when some semblance of normalcy returns. Adaptive change is about rebounding forward, but it's important to understand that it's also about finding measures that work for the current time, and they don't have to be something that you want to hold on to in the future forever. This family tries to embrace the idea of cooperative parenting teams. They attempt to do as much shift work as possible, attending to the kids whenever they're either not in a call or they are on a call where they can be on mute most of the time and they can split their attention more effectively. With a wider range of children in this family, there are times that they allow a big mess to form with an older child leading the activity for the younger ones. In their case, the older child loves the responsibility and the parents give up control and live with the mess in order to get through the important calls. Another common challenge with older kids is that there are just new parenting challenges. So I spoke with someone who said that one of the major challenges they faced was inventing new things for their teenagers to do. A neighbor had set up an art-to-go box thing, which sounded like a really great way of connecting by crafting together, but both kids were super not interested. Her stress parenting response was to hover over them and make them do lots of things, but that's not what the kids wanted. They wanted to do things that brought them comfort, and that's really doing the things that were already part of their lives before, and now, in response, is a strict part of the family schedule. What she reports as not working was her usual expectations for them to intercede themselves. So an adaptive part of authoritative leadership in this case is to listen to what the kids need and to provide a safe place for them to land. In this case, with less hovering and more routine and downtime. You can definitely overdo it by putting too much pressure on everyone, including yourself and your kids. Another parenting challenge for older kids is explaining the situation to kids who could leave the house and see friends, especially if their friends are hanging out, and then thus becoming the bad guy. Here again, using a leadership role in the family to manage new rules is key. Teens tend to respond better to the underlying reasons for a rule than the just because sort of answer. Many of them are old enough to reason through the problem with help. The last family I spoke with was another with two older kids. This family had challenges with Wi-Fi bandwidth and negotiating computer time. The kids really railed against the idea of needing to stay home, but although they're all in the house together, finding computer time for everyone means that they don't actually have as much time to be all together as a family as they were expecting. To me, this one is about acceptance. A major rebounding challenge here is to prioritize across family members. Whose computer time is more important? How do you even go about deciding that? Whose can give? This family had to adapt to a different hierarchy of importance and a different way of negotiating what each family member needs. If you find yourself in this situation, be prepared to talk together about the balances at play and to talk to the people who are demanding the deadlines to ask for some flexibility. between establishing a schedule, communication with the people that are requiring the work and deadlines, be that bosses or teachers, hopefully at least someone will be flexible. This will probably feel like a painfully slow process, and it might change day by day or week by week, depending on the projects that each person has to accomplish. In this family, reorganizing and restabilizing might include making a family computer schedule and posting it along with each person's work assignments somewhere that each person can see. Ours is printed out on the desk where the computer is. But this family also has a challenge in finding times to be together if they're also trying to maximize everyone's use of a finite resource. Having one predictable time to be together could help the family to stay connected. So this could be a meal. Dinner is great, but it could also be breakfast or bedtime snack or whatever works for the family. Or this might look like smaller subgroups of the family, like alternating meal preps in teams, in order to get at least some more togetherness, even if it's not literally the whole family together. Another common challenge is tight spaces. In smaller homes or apartments, there may not be a quiet space. There may not be a room with a locking door. And some people thrive working in clutter-free areas, and this might not be possible. Here, reorganizing and restabilizing might lead to new routines that double as a creative solution to a chaotic environment. For example, one of the families I spoke with included 4 kids spanning from 3 years to 4th grade. The mother is a teacher, and the father works remotely. On Fridays, he has to record a weekly podcast as part of his job, not unlike teachers who need to record lectures or any other number of things. One strategy that they found that works is going chalking. They get the kids in the car and drive them around the town to friends and family to write positive messages in chalk on their loved ones' driveways. It's great because it's now a stable, organized tradition, and it creates a calm and quiet space that's predictable on Fridays when he needs that calm and quiet space to be there. They also schedule their homework time for the evenings, where the father's in charge and the wife gets quiet time to record things for her students, which happens daily, as opposed to the chalking, which happens weekly. So now that I've inundated you with ideas and examples, I want to return to the most important message that I have today. Managing work-life balance in the same space with kids and no childcare requires acceptance, perspective taking, and flexibility to change. But you can cope with this. We as a species are resilient. It will not be easy, but you can find small things that work for your family. I hope that at least one thing that I've said today resonates with you. I hope that you found something that you can latch onto as you continue to create your own strategies. The guiding principles from the Science on Family Resilience can help you. As you create strategies that work for your own unique family, consider bouncing forward when you can. Try acceptance instead of stressing about the standards that you have to relax, like letting your kids have too much screen time or having them be bored. Reorganize and restabilize your family into a new normal. It can take a few weeks to find a rhythm, but by defining new family expectations, roles, routines, and schedules, that will help. This might include communicating with teachers and bosses in order to find the places that you can have more flexibility than you currently think that you can. As a family leader, it's important to remember to meet your kids where they are. Nurturing leadership looks different in every family, but it's your job to remember that kids have their own feelings and developmental abilities and tasks and struggles, and to remember to support them even as you feel like you're stretched thin. It's also important here to remember that you can and should maintain roles and responsibilities that are age appropriate, and that especially with older kids, it's okay to expect some independence. Finally, and above all, strive to be kind and respectful with yourself, in discussions with other caregivers, in discussions with your kids. A little grace goes a long way. And by a little, I really mean a little. These are aspirations and not words to fail by. Every success counts as a win, and every misstep can be moved past pretty quickly. If you want more support and resources, I'm part of a new resource. It's called Families Tackling Tough Times Together, which will be providing curated resources, tips, and ideas for helping your family thrive during challenging times. This will encompass a lot more family life to help you strengthen yourself, your family, and your community, and not just for families with kids, it's for families of all shapes and sizes. I encourage you to plug into this initiative as much or as little as you find useful. With that, I want to say thank you for your time, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. My email's on the slide. I'm happy to receive any emails, and we have some time for questions now as well.
Kristine, thank you. This was an amazing, very informative session. I know I took quite a bit from it in just kind of really thinking about some of the pressures that I've been placing on myself, and I know others have been as well. As we get started, if anybody has questions, please put them into the chat and we will start bringing those up. Kristine, two questions that have come up throughout the session that I did just want to address while we wait for other people to submit questions. Number one is, will this be put forth, or will this be recorded and put out for people to use again or to share with their audiences? I did just want to let everyone know that we are recording this webinar. We do plan to post it on Eden's YouTube page. So you can go to extensiondisaster.net, and there's a link there to Eden's YouTube page, and you'll be able to find a recording. It'll probably take a day or two to get that posted, maybe a little bit longer because we are right at a holiday weekend, but know that that will be being posted probably sometime next week. Kristine, there have been some other questions though about sharing this with a wider audience beyond Extension. Do you have any issues or any problems with people sharing this perhaps with their Extension clientele?
Feel free to share it with anybody. I tried to make it in a way that could connect to a wide array of people, so share it well.
And you did a great job with that, and I think that's why that question was coming up throughout the entire presentation was, I want to share this with various audiences. So please feel free to definitely get this out. As I was watching this, I felt like it would be very beneficial to a lot of our clientele. Another question that was brought up is, and I don't want to put you on the spot, so if you're not prepared to answer this one right away, that's okay. It was asked about sharing the slides themselves, and would those be available?
Yeah, I'm fine with making the slides available. I actually wrote everything that I said in the notes, so it should be standalone.
Okay, great. We'll get, Abby will put those somewhere, perhaps in an email to participants, that we can attach those slides for those that were requesting that. Many of them I think are very shareable, especially there was a lot of comments about the various charts that I think a lot of people are looking at those and thinking those are very shareable for a lot of people that we know. So that is great. Abby, do you want to jump in as well if you've seen any questions that we have missed? If anybody has questions, we're getting a lot of great feedback about the webinar, but I'm not seeing those. I do see one.
Yeah, so one question we have is, can you address when expectations from employers? Right now, many of us are saying that it's very difficult to not be stressed about our productivity when our employers are saying everything's status quo. We are expected to still have the same kinds of outputs. But yet our time balance is very different, and especially for those of us whose colleagues don't have children.
Yeah, it's a very challenging question for sure. The problem is, that it's very hard for bosses to know what's going on in any given family, especially if they're not being told. So my biggest advice is to just start those conversations and try to do it in a way where you're coming at it from a, hey, so I'm in a challenging situation right now. How can we work together to solve this problem, rather than from a way that's making demands? People tend to respond better to an ask for help and problem solving rather than accusations, which demands can sound like. Yeah, it's going to matter. It's just going to depend per person.
Great. And also, can you share tips for single parents who don't get that swap out with a partner option?
Yeah, oh, the single parents, that's the hardest one. I mean, truthfully, it's not awesome advice to give, but it's about managing expectations and lowering expectations. Single parents need to accept the fact that their job is going to suffer because they have to take care of their kids. Work in most cases, and there's also some work that really can't. So like there's, I'm hearing the people who are like, I have deadlines, and if I don't do this, then the whole hospital system is going to shut down. And there are definitely some situations where the work is less flexible than the kids, but you have to take a balance. You have to see what can give, what is not going to be less world ending, right? So like if I miss this deadline at work, what's really the worst problem that's going to happen? Or if I plug my kid into 4 movies today, what's really the worst that's going to happen? My kids personally won't plug into movies, so that might not be a good suggestion to people. But it's, for single parents, it's going to be a lot of giving in to child demands more than you want to, and missing work deadlines and being less productive than you want to, and just learning to accept that and accept that it's only going to be a short period of time, and just take it step by step, day by day. Right now, what's the most important thing that I have to be doing?
There was some really great conversation actually happening in the chat pod. So that will also be downloaded and distributed. People offering suggestions of what they found successful at home, and tips as well.
Abby, we've got one other, you probably were about to just say it.
Yep, go ahead.
I was gonna say there was one question that just came in. I think it's an appropriate follow-up to the question that you just asked, is what would be helpful for a boss to say or do with employees about this in managing this situation? And this person specifically, mentioned, that they are a supervisor. So what would be some tips for, a supervisor trying to help work with their employees in dealing with this situation?
Yeah, so in answering that question, what I like to ask is have the boss put themselves in take the perspective of somebody who might have a really challenging situation. Take whatever example from what I've said today or that they've heard of, and imagine you're that person. What would you need out of that boss? I think probably having a boss that just checks in and says, hey, I understand that this is a tough situation for everybody. Like, what does your situation look like? And are you able to manage? Is there something that I can do to help you? Even if everything is going okay, or even if there's actually nothing that the boss can do, just reaching out like that and showing that support will make the employee feel a lot more supported. One thing that has cropped up, as an educator is that my students don't all have good access to computers. They don't all have reliable Wi-Fi. So when we have our meetings, every single time we check in and say, okay, do you want to do this over the phone? Do you want to do this over video? Do you want to do this at another time of the week? Just to give them a little bit more say and to make sure that they know that they can be asking for things too. I can't always give it to them because I'm also in rough situations, but just asking, I think, usually helps a lot.
Can you address how parents can handle the information overload for between school assignments and communications coming out that way to the social media ideas? There's just information coming from all directions.
Yeah, that is a problem that I'm feeling a whole lot too. And all of this advice, I want you guys to know, this is my own personal opinions and it's not for everybody. And so asking other people that you know how they deal with things is a really great place to turn to as well. Personally, I don't even go on Facebook anymore because I don't have time to. I don't have time to look up activities or things like that. But when I'm in a pinch and the kids are eating a snack and I need something else to do, I'll like Google an activity and find one that I can do really quickly and do it that way. So I just go and search for a very specific thing in the moment that I need it, or when I know that I'm going to need it tomorrow or something like that. And I don't try to keep up with everything. You can't keep up with everything.
Another question that was, or at least pieces of conversations that were brought up in kind of different scenarios were, how do you handle almost a co-grieving with children? Many talked about the fact that they have either children that were seniors in college or seniors in high school who now are missing out on all of those big life moments, missing proms, missing recitals, missing graduations, either having lost jobs or are now entering or supposed to be entering a workforce where jobs are going to be very difficult to find at this moment. How do you handle, I think the question is handling grieving as a parent with your child, and then still on top of all of your other work life and home life balance as well?
That is so rough. And it's just such a sad thing that a lot of people are facing. My heart really goes out to everybody in those situations. My best advice, and granted, I'm not in this situation, so I'm probably not the best person to ask, but in terms of what we know about family communication, just making sure that you sit down with your kid at some point and ask how they're feeling, ask if there's something that you can do to help support them. They might have really good ideas that you don't know about. I've heard about people, engaging in vacation planning to substitute something new and different instead. So, nobody can travel right now, but, maybe over winter break next year, you'll do something special to make up for this. And it's not going to make up for this, but focusing on something positive and doing some more future planning can fill a void a little bit for times like this. It's so dependent on the kid, because other kids are going to not want to engage with the parent about it. And if that's the case, don't force it. All you can do is tell your child that you're there for them, offer to help, and ask what they need, and kind of do it on their terms with some dedicated set aside time.
Great advice. Thank you so much for all of your work in putting on this webinar, especially so quickly. The comments that we have been getting are overwhelmingly positive about the tips and the advice that you have provided here. I do want to thank everyone that was able to join us for this webinar. We will most likely be putting on additional webinars as we move through these difficult times. Thank you, Kristine, for being willing to present this. And if you have any final thoughts, we'll wrap up the webinar.
Yeah, my only final thought is, just remember that these are my opinions. They're somewhat grounded in science and other people's experiences, but you guys are also the experts here because you're navigating the situation and living it. So talking to each other about what works and what doesn't work and what your challenges are, talking to your community, talking to other people, that's really going to give you the best ideas.
Well, thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar.